So now we're going to start another debate. What European giant inside the world healthcare industry tomorrow? I will ask Olivier Charmel, Marie-Vonne Yance, Pierre Moustial, Diana Schilag to come up to the table, and Thierry Guerrier will be leading the debates.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Professor. Thank you, Guy. I invite you to take your seats. Marie-Vonne Yance, Diane Schilag, Olivier Charmel, Pierre Moustial. I was clearly indicated, and this is the style of Cham that we go straight into the heart of the topic. We don't present our guests. That comes out during the discussions. So we're treading water in a world that's swimming away quickly, and Europe and the French people historically are at the starting point of healthcare innovations, and this for decades. And even today, France, as we've seen over the last 2 days, is really at the heart of this ability to innovate. It attempts to remain so, but there are sticking points. It's difficult to reach the necessary threshold to become a big player and to be able to rival with the organizations mentioned by Bruno Le Maire. So it's difficult to be in this place where the Prime Minister was sitting yesterday. We've seen many politicians here. We've had this minister, the Prime Minister yesterday. They're saying the framework is evolving. We're doing what's necessary. Is this really true? And this is something that we're going to talk about now. Marie-Vonne Yance, you're the representative of companies that are trying to emerge and go further. Let's start by going around the table and looking at the strengths and weaknesses today of the healthcare industry today, with the different thresholds that you represent. You, through medtech and biotech. Today, I am convinced that in France and in Europe, we can have a healthcare Google because we have considerable strengths. We have strengths and a window. Our strength is our research. Science in France is very solid. The growth in the number of publications in prestigious magazines is 50% per year. That's significant, and this between 2008 2014. And science is central to us. Secondly, we have researchers and entrepreneurs who are very motivated. And today, in the startups that we're identifying, 80% come from research. So that means there's a real will to move away from the concept of products in research centers and then to bring them to real products that come to market. As Mr. Le Maire just said, we also have financial assets, the research tax credit, the status of enterprise innovative companies, and other measures, and all of this is very positive. These strengths are the source of the emergence of technological innovation in France and in Europe. So we'll come back later to the sticking points in your eyes later. So, Olivier Charmel, you represent companies that have emerged and that are imposing themselves. Do you have the same vision of the possibilities, these stakes for Europe and for France? I'm quite struck. I arrived by the debates. I arrived yesterday, and I came from China, and I've listened to people who are just accepting the situation. It's true that the world is going quickly, and that has not changed. We're advancing at incredible speed, and I'm not really worried. Though I am a little bit worried if in 5 years, if we don't move quickly, we're going to be in a really difficult situation. Why? Because firstly, research is vital. We all know that. Americans are investing 3% of their GDP in R&D, and we know that we're only at 2% in France and at 3% in Germany. What's incredible is that in 2015, China was at 2%, and China will be at 3-4% in the coming years. The second element that's important is that I feel that people are a bit afraid of innovation. I come back to a conversation that I had with the head of a health company in China saying, in a few years, we will have 1 hour between the symptom and the delivery of the drug at home. So, of course, with artificial intelligence, with vocal recognition, voice recognition, last week I met with the head of a big insurance company in China. In China, when you have a car accident, you take a photo of the wing that was damaged. There's facial recognition, and 2 days later, you receive the amount of the repair so that you can go have the work done. So you see all the applications that go along with this. So we're afraid to introduce these types of technologies and the way we design our technologies. It's a fear based on 2 feet. Structurally, we're afraid of going too far. We have the principle of precaution in France, and then financially, we're a bit afraid to invest in a sector that where we're not sure how things will evolve. Well, today we shouldn't be concerned or frightened at all. In the health industry, Europe has a strong position. We have 700,000 people working in the health sector. We have 1 billion euro surplus. A company like ours exports 6 to 7 billion. So we have real strengths. But it is obvious that if we don't go sufficiently fast, if we are too concerned, too frightened, we'll end up in a difficult situation. And being frightened means that we need to recognize that there are possibilities to work with developing countries that are going more quickly than us. I was in Switzerland recently, and a colleague said the opportunity of something that's coming later, the opportunity of provided by people who were a bit late. And we need to understand that certain things we need to change. The former minister of Benin explained how they're investing in health, how they're not trying to duplicate a technology or things that we have done, but they just want to build it differently. In my teams, I have people who are thinking about health in a completely different manner. We see this in China and Africa, the notion of online hospitals. That doesn't mean doctors will no longer be in the circuit, in the loop, but the first elements will take place online. Another big group, Air Liquide Healthcare, you have a vision, you're German, you live and work in France. Do you feel this lack of adventurousness or timidity? Do you think we haven't found the right model? I'm German, you're right. I've been working for Air Liquide for 23 years in Europe and for 12 years now in health. Already, when we look at the observations today, there isn't a single European market. Each country has its specific characteristics, its models, be it for the care they provide or the way in which they finance their health care. The challenge behind this, when we look at each state, is that we're also seeing silos in the countries. In France, the way, the locations at which people are cared, there's an opposition between hospitals and private practices, private and public operators, and we can't continue this way, particularly with the increase in chronic diseases, and Olivier Véran made a good summary of this earlier. We cannot continue working in silos. It is time to change the way we work, to focus on more innovation, more cooperation throughout the health pathway. And this is where we intervene. We have a position at Air Liquide that's quite unique. We work on chronic disorders. Most of you know Air Liquide through our hospital activities, drugs, medical gases in the hospital. But for more than 30 years now, Air Liquide has been a driver in the shift to outpatient care. So the will to participate in the full monitoring of the patient path from treatment to home. The technicians and the nurses from Air Liquide come to the patient's bed. They arrive with medical equipment, sometimes a drug, insulin and an insulin pump, and they spend their time explaining the treatment, and they do therapeutic support. I didn't mention Sanofi. If we just talk about Air Liquide, but you're saying in this process, this will to work on care from home to improve it. You've underscored that, saying it's a big challenge. The Chinese are already doing it. This is an example of where things are blocking. The assessment of the public authorities of these new systems is taking too long. It's not that it's necessarily too long. We have a volume approach and an annual approach. We should be on a multi-annual approach to give more visibility, and we need to be cooperating. We need to create complete offers for the patient for their health care. So strengths and weaknesses, Pierre Moustial, you could say the opposite. Urgo does a lot of work on medical devices in your field, but you're saying there's no real French champion in technology today. Carmat could be one. It's just one example, but we know they've been having some problems. There's the problem of the principle of precaution in all of these product developments. So our company is an innovation champion. Innovation doesn't create a market or a world leader. Olivier spent the week in China. I spent the week in the US. And in medical technologies, in the top 100, there are 50 Americans. There are some big European companies, but there isn't a single French champion against all expectations. France is the champion in all sectors, food, luxury, pharmacy, but no one in medical technologies. And I say against all expectations because we've been talking about research. We have two centers that are amongst the biggest research centers in the world, INSERM and the PHP. We have Nobel Prize level physicians that have given rise to medtech against expectations, because in the 1,000 medical technology, 900 are French and 100 are being created each year. And if you look at the industrial fabric in France, most of them are very small companies, very small enterprises. There are none in the top ones worldwide. So in France, we don't have a problem with startups. We have a problem with scale up. We don't know how to take an innovative company. We have innovations that are at a world-class level, but we can't turn them into companies. But why? And we'll come back to the sticking points. Let's try to identify them. What are the obstacles? Is there not enough public financing to create these sectors? Or do the is private financing too timid? Is the market too fragmented? What are the reasons, in your opinion, that we don't go from a startup to a scale-up? There are lots of reasons, but I'll cite two. There's a political problem to begin with, and also a European problem. And I think that there's a problem with financing. Today, a med tech, since I'm talking about medical technologies, is carrying a 30-kilo bag to run their race, when German and American med tech are carrying a bag that weighs 5 kilos. In the U.S., we've talked about this already, they set up the parallel review program, which makes it possible to do the FDA evaluation in parallel with the reimbursement assessment. Imagine the impact on the lead time. They do these in parallel. So this makes it possible to come to market earlier. So we're delighted by what the Prime Minister announced, talking about reduction in lead times. We're also delighted what we've called the ATU of medical devices, so the temporary authorization for medical devices. This is linked to chronic and serious diseases. But if I look at the members of the MedTech Society that I chair, most will not be able to benefit from that. I hope I'm wrong. I hope that in the coming years we'll see a change. The first obstacle for me, and there are three, or several major ones, financing is a major problem because, as I said earlier, we have enough public funds to begin, and even 50 million, as the Prime Minister said, it's difficult to raise that in France, even on the public market, which is extremely dynamic because we're the #1 in Europe for listed companies in health, and second after the NASDAQ, and first in the world for medtech. But we're incapable of raising 100, 200, 300 million to bring a drug to market. One of the leading companies, DBV Technologies, that raised 700 million euros, 80 in France, and the rest came from the U.S. Is that linked to the fragmentation that Diana Schillag mentioned? Or is it because people are timid? No. The innovative technology industry, health industry, is a young industry. We started 20 years after Boston. So we need time. It takes 15 years to bring a drug to market. And this industry in France is only 20 years old. So we're not yet sufficiently aware that these new technologies that in 2050 will represent 80% of the market, 1,000 billion in the world, these companies are global from the outset, and this major economic challenge and societal challenge until today has not been taken into account by politicians, and I'm delighted that the President and the Prime Minister are taking this into account in their plans. They're taking into account innovation. So if we can convince politicians, we can convince the private sector to invest. We have enough public investment in France. What we're lacking is private investment. And for that, we need to believe in this industry, trust in these companies, convince them to invest. There are lots of private funds in France. We need to convince them to invest. So you've launched the question of financing. Let's talk about the framework. What are the obstacles? You said it's too complex. The assessment is too complex. There are two obstacles in my mind. Collectively, we're not at the level of the stakes yet. We haven't taken into account the urgency of the situation. I'm talking about a collective we. I said I'm less concerned about today than for the future because I think that we're not going to be moving fast enough in the coming years. The second thing that seems important to me and that really struck me is the fact that in terms of introducing innovation, even if a lot of progress has been made, we still all know that our procedures are too slow. 400 days on average in France between the moment where you get your market authorization and the go-to-market. So innovation, by definition, is a cumulative exponential process. If we miss the first step, it's going to be more and more difficult to go to the second or third step. And that is why we need to progress. We need to improve the acceleration of innovation. Of course, we'll make mistakes, but we have to accept to make some mistakes because otherwise we will end up in a situation where we'll have missed the first step and then you can't go to the third step without the first step. So what's your vision of the ideal model to get away from this fragmentation or these obstacles? There are different procedures in each country despite the European agency. I completely agree with you. We need to accelerate. That is the real challenge. And we need to go further together. For me, I would like to say that great things are already being done. We talk about payment for performance. We set this up for sleep apnea, payment for patient adherence. So payment to the service providers, to the companies, not a payment to the patient. No, it's payment to the service provider who equips the patient beside their bed with a medical device that they need to combat sleep apnea, and they're paid depending on how the patient buys into the treatment, the patient's observance of the treatment. So this is a great first step, and I think that we can create other similar initiatives. I think that we need to work in collaborative mode. If we want to develop comprehensive offers for the future in order to deal with these stakes, which is not necessarily the size of European giants. It's good to have big European companies, but for innovation and collaboration, we need to work together. Well, you can say that because you're a big company. Yes, we're a leader, but as a leader, we have a responsibility. We have a responsibility to be a pioneer, to invest in things that we consider important. Yes, but not alone. Let me give you an example.
So we are, as part of IoT Health, a consortium with 140 people in Europe. With Sanofi, we have a project together to create an artificial pancreas for patients with diabetes type 2 who are not autonomous and are on insulin. So we're working with Sanofi, with another startup as well, developing an innovative insulin pump, working on algorithms, and universities across Europe. I'd like to have more initiatives like this, in fact. Pierre Moussial, do you have coordinators today? No. I agree with that idea. When you look at the power of the Silicon Valley model and the attractiveness of the GAFA and how they help young companies, I think we could create a Silicon Valley for medical devices in Bourgogne, for example. Yes, we do have our attractive points. There are many companies who have started to do this, Sanofi, Air Liquide, Urgo, and others. Servieux has a program with a system of partnership, a mentorship program, profit sharing. It's a win-win situation. Companies benefit from opportunities on the international markets, and for us, it's a real elixir of youth. So, are you finding what you need? There is something that you haven't cited so far, and that is data manager in all of that. We've been talking about drugs and medical devices. You've said it, we all know it. Before even coming to the table here, it's a key question today. And I'm citing it now because this is the asset of GAFAs. So Europe is finished when it comes to that. I have an experience that I'd like to share. Everybody says we're great, but in fact, we've come to the end of our run. Whereabouts are we? Don't worry. We'll manage things. Let me share an experience with you. So there's a retirement home chain who wanted to work like a distribution chain, and they wanted a discount. Now, we set up a digital solution for them. We did diagnoses. We looked at protocols. At the end of the pilot study, we'd reduced the healing times by 35%. And the cost by 38% of healing. So all of the data collected made it possible to produce innovation and improve protocols. So the lesson that I draw from this is that we can still do things, but future solutions will be based on multiple technologies. There'll be a bit of digital, a bit of bio, a bit of physics, and the data will be in the middle of all of that. You've cited the GAFAs already. It's not by chance that all of the GAFAs, and let me add Microsoft as well, the GAFAMs, are in the health field. I'm saying to my teams that it's not glasses that we need, it's a kind of a long sight lens. So we've got the BATZ and the GAFAs who will play a big role in the future. Yes, what would you like to say about this? Well, let me come back to what Pierre was saying. It's very important. You know, digital technology, it's an integral part of treatment today. We can't care for people like we did in the past. The medication is central. We have more and more biomedicines, and we've got an increasingly personalized kind of approach. There are different kinds of cancers. So we need to use big data to manage this. Now, the main core of this is medication, but around that you've got big data, you've got medical devices. So all of that forms a whole today. And I think that if you look at communication, if you look at digital technology, they take up a lot of room. So you're saying that I'm right. So the GAFAMs are controlling everything. And Europe, how can Europe emerge from that? How can we play a role? No, but Europe is using that data. We have abilities to integrate that data. And we control? Yes, we can have platforms. I think that for cancer, for example, we have to work. So if we take Google, what about our European reality in terms of management? Yes, we need to develop that. This is what I was saying in my preamble. We have an extraordinary opportunity. We mustn't waste time about getting in there, as you've already said, because we'll miss the boat. So it's very important to move ahead. So just to contradict my objection, I remember the discussion a few weeks ago with the Evry Jean Paul. We were talking about platforms and the ability to manage more subtle data, complex data. And we're very good at that. Well, the GAFAs, I see the GAFAs every day because they come knocking at the door. They come knocking at the door because they specialize in data processing. Going into the health field for them is something that's very important because they realize that there are opportunities. A few weeks ago, I heard something. There was a strategic review made by an aviation company. They'd identified a certain number of areas. They knew that air traffic was going to be reduced. And one of the areas they'd identified was the healthcare area. The world is changing. They know this. The world is changing very quickly. We all know that things are going to be changed. We're going to move from 90 million people to 160 million people who are over the age of 65 in the space of 30 years. The GAFAs, they have this kind of data, but they don't know what the healthcare systems are like, the healthcare pathways, and they're not familiar with the drugs. So the challenge for us, well, we have the expertise. So people learn very quickly today. I remember a few years ago at Google, what struck me with Google was that their business model was based on human capital. They use intelligent people, they bring them together. It doesn't matter what the business model is, they will find discontinuities, they will find breakthroughs. Now, this notion of the right business model, it's something that you're all insisting on. Pierre Moustial in particular, it's one of your proposals. Can you explain it to us? We're talking about solutions. We've got a little over 10 minutes left. Well, the solution, I've experimented with this pilot project in Spain. I don't really understand much about digital technology, to be honest, and I wondered whether I should take on a chief digital officer. But above all, no, that would have been a big mistake. Yes, that would have been a big mistake. It's field experimentation that's important. It's field experimentation that made us decide to change, to adapt. In the future, well, today, the physicist, the chemist, the biologist were the inventors. I'm not sure whether this will be the case in the future. What happens when we look at applications? What simplifies our lives? Why is it going to be different for nurses and doctors? What's going to change things in the future is organization. And this comes back to the debate that we were having earlier on. France today finds it difficult in the reimbursement path to integrate that reorganization. It's complementary, and that's what's going to save our health system. You want to be very positive. You've presented your different initiatives and your investments. But the project that you talked to us about, for the moment, it's not working. It hasn't been validated by the authorities. It's still in an initial phase. The artificial pancreas, it's underway. But you're saying that we need to invest, but it's still at the investment stage. We can't be remunerated. So that question of the business model, finding the right business model, you said you need to defragment, you need to work on the European market. What else? I think, well, I start with the patient. What are the patient's needs? And the patient's needs, whether you're in Spain, Germany, Norway, or in Italy, the patient's needs are the same. So what we do is we start with the patient's need. After that, you have to innovate throughout the healthcare path. You look at the patient's healthcare path. You ask yourself, who is involved along that pathway in order to create a global offer that pleases everybody? The doctor, because we're saving them time, because they can manage critical patients better. Nurses, because they know that their time is precious, and patients too. So for me, data is just an enabler or a tool to facilitate all of this. But we can't disassociate data or equipment from human beings. The two have to go together. Let me give you a concrete example. With our Chronic Air Connect program that we're rolling out in Spain and France as part of the ETAP program, it focuses on different pathologies, for example, heart failure. Today, we're following patients. We sign agreements with hospitals, with healthcare centers to manage these patients as part of a medical protocol that's established with the doctor. Then there are connected objects. We've already talked about these. So basically, the scales and oximeter for diabetes sufferers. So there are several connected objects that pick up data. We send that data to a specialized nurses center. They deal with the data. The patients see the results as well. And that's very good. The patients see their own results. This is patient empowerment. Patients really feel as though they're being supported and managed properly. This is so that doctors can intervene when necessary. There's a study in Germany on this device, and it's proved that there was an increase in life expectancy of 50% for these patients. So that we have the ingredients. We all have the ingredients. Let's bring them together around the table. Let's think about the right kind of regulation and the financing that should go with it. So we've got a few more minutes. There are 4 of you. You've got 2 minutes each to conclude and to tell us exactly what you would like us to take away from this discussion. What is the takeaway message? How can we have a European power emerging, if not a European giant or pharmaceutical company or medical device? Or, would you like to start? Well, to get to the market, you have to have money. So a call for money. Yes, we haven't got enough private funds. One solution, therefore, is to create a European NASDAQ that would allow startups to raise 500 million euros, for example. Now, the second proposal that I have is to get rid of the precautionary principle for innovation in France. Yes, I won't go back over the subject, but it's something that's weighting us down. Olivier Charmel, what's the takeaway message? I think we need a good dose of optimism. But we also need a great strength, and Pierre, you said this very well. A large part of our future is linked to our ability to change our organizational system. We're all working in silos. We're all working in silos in our organizations, in our companies, when in fact we should be building an ecosystem that works more efficiently. We all know that the health system is not efficient. We know that digital technology is going to give us access to data so that we can better measure the efficiency and effectiveness of each euro that's spent. So let's work together. Let's get rid of the silos. We've all been in meetings where we're looking at each other with daggers. We all have the same objective. We want to build an ecosystem that will allow all citizens access to healthcare. The third point is that there's no innovation without research. There's no innovation without, of course, intellectual property and data protection. That's something that's absolutely critical. Now, the wages in R&D are long-term wages, and we've got to be sure that the framework defined for Europe continues to be a strong framework to ensure intellectual property. So this is a way of saying that politicians need to support us. This is something that you insist on. Yes, this will be my first proposal. We're talking about Europe today. Why don't we use Europe as an opportunity for registrations for our products? This is what I would call the principle of equivalence. A study that's carried out, so a kind of European NHS, yes. So that is conclusive in Germany. Why can't it be acceptable in France, this study? Of course, as long as there are guidelines and counter-expertise operations. So why can't we use that as an opportunity? Secondly, and I agree with Marie-Yvonne, we've got a problem with money. Guy Valenciennes asked a question. Is it easy to find 50 million? The Prime Minister said, yes, of course. And they're both right. For a company that's mature, that's earning money, you won't... it's difficult for a company that's developing, that has to invest in sales forces, that has to invest in its development. No, the answer is no. It's very complicated. It's very complicated to find 50 million euros. So it's easier for a big company rather than a small company. So we have we share a point around this table. We're all experts in diabetes. Sanofi has some great products and medical devices. Air Liquide is the champion when it comes to home care. France Biotech, you've got some biotechnologies very much involved in diabetes, and we're very much involved in diabetes as well. Why not have a champions team in France for diabetes? We'll create that. Why can't we be European champions so that we can have more striking force abroad? And you would coordinate the diabetes sector. Yes, whatever. You can see that I'm acting as a Minister of Health. So you're going to conclude. You're the most European of all of us. Well, I'm delighted by what I've heard today, this wish to really join forces and to move ahead. There's this feeling that things have become urgent. The only thing that I'm sad about is that there are people missing around this table. There are no doctors, there are no hospital representatives. So the world is more complex. We can decide among company people to do something, but if we don't have the kind of financing system, or if we don't offer a carrot at the end of the tunnel, I can invest for 4 years in experimentation, but I need to know whether it's going to, without knowing whether it's going to work. But I need to know whether there's going to be something in return. So data, digital technology, we mustn't forget the patient. The patient is in the middle of all of that. The patient needs to be the most valuable part of the puzzle. The Germans are much more ambitious than the French. We've just proven this. The carrot has to be at the end of the tunnel, whereas, we've got either a carrot or a stick in France. Anyway, thank you very much for that roundtable discussion. Thank you to all four of you. Thank you very much.